Okay, so here's where we left off with our map, or a little bit of overlap. So we had symbolized our roads and our lakes and the city boundaries with different colors. And if we wanted to edit those, we can just simply click on the layer that we need, go up to the appearance panel or ribbon, click on symbology, and add the field that we want to symbolize them on. In this case, we use lanes, and we went through and we used a color palette, but then we changed the individual colors of the roads, with the last one being thicker as well as the different color. So we just left clicked on the swatch and we got to the properties of that line. So now we can go to our labeling, where we can add the field by which we want to label these, in this case, roads. So if we look at the attribute table, we have a name field, but we also have another name field, the RD name, and that had the suffix of the roads on it. And so we decided we would use that in our labeling ribbon as the what you call it, the field or the column from which we want to produce the labels in the map. All right, where is it? It's in here somewhere. And here we go. Okay, we can turn them on. We also edited the size of the text and the color of the text, so it kind of matched most of the roads. Of course, not the 6-lane one, but we put the font size to 7, which is pretty small, and we used a medium gray for the color of the text, so or the label text, so it would match the color of the roads. So all in all, that's about all we did, but we did also adjust the label placement a little bit by clicking on that little label placement properties button. None of these other labels did much for it. So if we go down to the conflict resolution, which has an icon that looks like some labels that are kind of stacked on top of each other, and we remove the duplicate labels, then we don't have to see, like Main Street, as a bunch of for every segment in between intersections, there's a segment of that road, and that would get labeled if we didn't do that. So that's why we want to do that. All right, and we can turn the label on in 2 ways, either going to the right-click menu and turning it on, or the big label button up on the ribbon. So there we go. Good enough. If we zoom in, we can see more roads labeled, and zoom out, you see fewer roads labeled, but we don't know what our scalar maps yet, so we're not going to mess too much with that. So as far as the lakes and rivers go, we just used a nice blue, the same blue we used for the color of the lakes themselves, and let's put the font down to a nice smaller size. And now the lakes didn't have a name to start with. Let's show them all here. Okay, so we added a name field just by clicking on the add field in the attribute table, and this pulls up a list of all the fields, and at the bottom adds one, and so we can name that. In this case, since I already had a name field added, let's just add another one. Like maybe we could add a type, and that could be text also. Tab over to the length of the field. Probably don't need anything more than maybe 35 for this as well. We did about 35 for the names also. Okay, so if I have to click save at the top, and then I'll apply those changes and wait for those changes to be added, and for it, close that, and now we have at the end here a field of type. Now I could just double click in there and start changing the types of each of those, but I don't really know where they are or which ones are which in the table. but I can go to the map, and with my select tool, I can select all the lakes and hold the shift key down. And select the lakes. Zoom in on that one a little bit. And holding the shift key, selecting, I think there's one over here somewhere. Yeah, that little guy. Okay, so with the lakes selected, I can go to the lakes attribute table and I can just show only those 6 selected ones by clicking on show the selected records, and I can go through and type all 6 of those in there, but better yet, in the edit ribbon, we can, and also in the map ribbon, we can click on the attributes panel and we can select all 6 of them at once and change all 6 of them at once by clicking on first, shift clicking the last, going down to the type, and type in lakes. Now, I don't expect, this isn't required. This is just an example of what we did because I already did the name one. So this is what we did with the name field to name all the rivers and lakes. And so we also just kind of concatenated those using the select tool. We selected, like all the San Juan River there, and then we actually merged all those together. But if you have questions on that, let me know. But anyway, we can change that type to river, and that's all good. Okay, so now we can look at the names. So we have lots of different segments of that San Juan River named, and so now we're ready to label it. So we're labeling it based on name. Turn on the labels, and again, we're going to have to remove duplicate ones or whatever. We have a blue Arial italic font, and we can mess with the placement of them, but none of those really work that well because they're all inside, well, except for the boundary one. But because they're the same color, we don't want them that close. So we're going to go to the placement, and we're going to choose horizontal around polygon. There's another one that's outside the curves around polygon, but it's, well, we can see what it looks like in a sec. Yeah, it's not going to work. Although for the rivers, it does kind of work. But we'll get into that later. Anyway, let's leave it at horizontal. Let it redraw here. And we're going to be good here. Yep. So now that we have the roads and the rivers and water features labeled, I think that's all we have to do. We don't really need to do the city boundary to label it. We're pretty much ready to add a layout, right? So before I add a layout in the insert ribbon, I kind of want to zoom in on the map kind of far. So that gives me kind of a reference scale, if you will. And then when I add a layout, go to new layout, Farmington's wider east-west than it is tall north-south, so let's go with landscape letter, and that just gives you a piece of paper that size. And so we can add the map frame. Now, when we insert that map frame, we have that scaled map that we just set as an option. So I'm going to start at the upper left. I'll give myself a 1/4 inch from the corner there. So an 8.5 by 11 gives me 8 1/4 by, well, starting at 8 1/4 and 1/4. And I'll click and drag down to the bottom, which gives me, what, 10 3/4 and, well, 1/4 at the bottom because 0 starts at the bottom there. So about right there should work okay. And it pulls up at that scale. Well, that scale is not exactly perfect, and this frame I can move around and add more maps to this layout, not just a single one, but right now that's all I want to do is a single map. And now if I right click and activate it, I can zoom in and out and pan and get things centered and zoomed right. So that original zoom level wasn't as, it was necessary to get it. It saved me some work or whatever. We're going to use 63,360 because that's how many inches there are in a mile. That forces the map to be, or sets the map at 1 inch is equal to a mile, which is a nice scale, verbal scale. ArcGIS calls it something else, and I'll show you that in a minute. So yeah, I get it zoomed and pan, and I can go back. I can either click the back arrow of the layout button. Now I'm not activated anymore. I can simply right-click on that box and activate it again. But if I need to zoom or pan or something, so there we go. There's our layout. Now we're ready to, well, add some marginalia, right? That's the like title and north arrow and scale bar and things like that. So let's add a north arrow here, and we'll stick it over here in the upper left for time being, and that looks okay. We'll add a scale bar, a good scale bar. I like the stepped scale one, so I'm going to add that just under the north arrow. Now this has way too many steps, and the numbers are horrible, right? I can't even read the lower ones, so we can stretch that out to read a good even number like 2. That's pretty good. But still, I can't read those smaller numbers, and there's too many divisions. You know, it looks cool to have it that many steps, but not too great. So I'll just move some stuff around here, and I'll select the scale bar here, right-click it, and go to Properties. Now with that, I can look at the number of divisions and subdivisions. So I'm going to set the divisions down. Well, 0 gives you nothing, and 1 gives you the 0, 1, and 2, and then the 2 subdivisions will put the steps in it nicely. So 2 subdivisions, 1 division. Looks pretty good. I'm at 2 miles, so it's a nice even number. Looks all right for this map. Should be just fine. All right. So, and I've matched the steps with the numbers. Looks pretty good. I think we can look at centering it and adjusting where it goes a little bit later, but it should be fine. All right, let's see what else. Yeah, we want to put another type of scale anyway is called a relative scale, and there's also an absolute scale. So right now, relative scale is kind of our verbal scale, or using units. So there's my 1 inch equals 1 miles. We probably need to change that, so I'll move it into place, and let's go to its properties. It's already over here actually, so I can just edit this text over here. So there's a button there where we can add some stuff. I'm going to take out the S in miles, and I could even just replace that equals with an equal sign instead. And here's where you can change the scale. So where it says map units, instead of miles, we can use feet or something else. Miles works really well in this case, so I'm going to leave it as mile. So there we go. 1 inch is equal to 1 mile. So that is a good verbal or representative scale. Okay. So there's we could put an absolute scale in there as well, but that's pretty good. So now as far as legend goes, if I go back to the map and look at the table of contents, I have the roads with its symbology, the lakes with, you know, a swatch there, and the city limits as a thick, dark line. Well, what the legend allows me to do is be more explicit and describe those symbols explicitly in words and symbols to show the reader. Helps the reader interpret the map better, right? So we're going to put the legend, you know, down on this right portion here. Looks pretty good. Now, the shows me the number of lanes and what each color means for each road color. So that looks pretty good. If I can adjust the properties of, there's lots of different properties for the legend, and we'll get into those as well. But we can adjust, you know, the columns and how it changes as you change the size of the legend. We can put a background and a drop shadow and rounding of the shape itself. We can specify the size more precisely in just by number, in other words. So we have lots of different things. We can even edit the symbols, but we're just going to pretty much leave it alone. That looks pretty good as is. I've already changed the the labeling just by going to the table of contents in the map and just clicking on a layer, and I can just retype it in. Like lakes, they're not just lakes, so I could call them water features. And the rest, and it updates in the legend automatically. So all I have to do is just edit the names in the table of contents in my map, and the legend will show that. So I can go back to my map and make more edits and things like that, and my layout will reflect those changes. So that's real nice. So it looks pretty good. We have nice descriptions for each layer, number of lanes, and what each number of lanes, what color they get. Looks just about right. That helps the reader interpret the map nicely. So looking pretty good. It's laying out all right. I think I might need a title, some text. Now a title could reside in the dynamic text, but we can just type in our own title as well. So I'm just going to drag a box out here, some rectangle text, type in. A good title for the map might be City of Farmington. Sounds good. Probably need to increase the size of the font, which is easy enough if I just go to text symbol, under appearance, just change the point size. I wouldn't go more than like 30 something, so 26 is probably good enough. Click apply, and there it is. I could also change the positioning, such as center justified. If I had more than one line, that would be nice, but don't need it in here. Well, actually, I didn't apply it, so it's just going to, I can just click yes, and then it centers it there. So you have to click apply at the bottom. Anyway, there's the City of Farmington title. I could lay these things out. We'll get to that when we talk about cartography and stuff. But at this lower left, I have some room here for like my name, date, and some data citation, which is where we got the data. So you know, I didn't draw this map. I prepared it, or just, you know, map by Brian, right? And I put the date in. Let's see, what day is it today? It's got to be something like the 3rd. That was when we did this last portion of the map anyway. And then here's where we put our data sources, I guess, or a data citation. And if we had like layers from a lot of different places, this could get pretty long, but in this case, I just have one data source, the City of Farmington. So that should be just good enough. I do think the text is a little large. This is a pretty minor type of data, so I can stick it down here in the corner. Maybe go to text symbol and lower the size of that to maybe 8 or 9. Should be okay. Click apply. There we go. Lower it down a little bit more. Looks okay. So at this point, get it there. Looks all right. There's some other things you can do with lining stuff up, but we'll get to that as well. So anyway, this is the a good enough layout for our first map, our intro to GIS map. We added layers, we laid it out, we added scale. Everything's looking pretty easy to read. Labeling looks all right. Laid out okay. So about time we can output this map. There's 2 main ways. One, digitally, and we can just export it to a format, or you can just use a traditional print in the layout. In this case, PDF is probably going to be our best file type, just because it can support the layers in the map itself. So just make sure it's being saved where you think it should be saved. In this case, it is going into that same folder as the project, and Esri actually defaults to that. ArcGIS Pro defaults to that, so looks good. Just make sure it has a nice name, something that you can recognize later. And we can look at compression. There aren't any images in here really, so I don't have to worry about that. But as far as the vector data goes, like the roads and the rivers and all that, basically everything in here is vector data. And so 300 dots per inch, that's pretty much what the printer is going to print to, maybe 600, but in this case it's going to be totally fine. So export it out and we're good to go. We can import, we can submit that to our Canvas assignment, and that pretty much takes care of it. All right, that should do it for what this is a good summary of what we did.